The center's aim is to, in a sense, do for long life what our ancestors in the 20th century did for young life. That is, in the 20th century, childhood experiences were very poor. There was a lot of malnourishment, very high mortality rates, and low education. And our ancestors said, this is not unacceptable, and invested in science and technology and pharmaceutical development and public health and education, a range of things. And those children began to make it through early childhood. They did much better, and they are now us. Unfortunately, the culture that was built to support young life is still the culture that's guiding us today. And so what we need to do quickly is to think about the medical advances, the technological changes and so on that we can use to support people for 100 years as opposed to 50 years. So we want to use science and technology to improve longevity. I think my greatest enjoyment comes from the multidisciplinarity of the Stanford Center on Longevity. We are very much focused on solving problems and taking on societal challenges, individual challenges, or so related to long life. And it turns out, I have learned over the years, that when you want to solve a problem, when there's a particular issue to address that requires change, it's rare that one discipline knows the answer to it. And so what happens is we pull people together around, faculty affiliated with the center, or pull them together around a particular question issue, and everybody comes to the table with something. And that's where the sparks start to fly and the fun gets going, because that's when you see real solutions. Where educators are saying, this is what you need to do for training, and employers are saying, this is what you need to do to extend longer working lives, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so I've been studying aging forever, lots longer than the center has been around. And when I first began working with the group of us that established the center, we had 3 research divisions. One was on, we called it MIND, that'd be on emotional well-being and cognitive functioning. One was on money, financial security, and another on mobility. And that was really functional health. And we thought when we began our work that it would be easy to have a project that would be about functional health, or one about financial security, or one, that they would fall into these silos. I thought I'd be leading the one on the mind with a couple other psychologists and sociologists and so on. But it turns out that almost everything we did required people from all 3 of those domains. And so was really an insight that I gained, and I think my colleagues gained through the work that we did. That is, in order to be financially secure, you have to be physically fit. You have to be cognitively able to engage in these tasks, and all of them work in that way. And so it was thinking about how much they influence one another that led us to, in some ways, set aside that 3-siloed approach and begin a new initiative that we call the New Map of Life. So the New Map of Life it refers to an initiative that we launched in 2018. Andrew Scott has been integrally involved in this throughout, always encouraging us to have a global New Map of Life and not just a U.S. New Map of Life. But what this effort is doing is to both envision what a thriving century-long life looks like, where people have a sense of purpose and belonging and worth throughout life at every stage. And to first envision that, and I mention that first because sometimes I think that's the hardest part, or that's the most challenging part. We did a survey before we started this initiative, and one of the questions was, what are your goals if you live to 100? And what people said is, I hope I still have some money, and I hope I'm not demented. And we said, we need to raise that bar. It can't just be, I don't want to be demented and living in poverty. Let's think bigger. And so we gathered a group of people to say what would need to change to bring that about, from social roles to opportunities to health. And what came from that were insights about key changes that would have to happen from very early life all the way through. And so that's when we started to say, what does that new map look like? And we're very excited about where this project is going. It's amazing. You look at the numbers, the demography, why aren't people just jumping on this? And it's always puzzled us, and suddenly it feels like that's happening. There are businesses emerging. There's a lot of new, interesting thinking about longevity in a number of different domains. We're teaching a course at Stanford on the business of longevity. There's lots of interest in startups and existing companies on how they can accommodate both older workforces and serve older populations. So we're just seeing this slew of activity that feels like it just started suddenly. Some of it's COVID. COVID helped do this. COVID broke the system that wasn't working anyway and revealed cracks in that system that I think people are beginning to say can be solved. That is, if somebody had said to us 3 years ago, why don't people just work 4 days a week? And people would say, that's never going to happen. And then you say, couldn't people work from home some of the time? And wouldn't that even help, commutes and this and that? Wouldn't that be good for families? And we'd say, no, employers are never going to stand for that. And all these things are now happening. We're also seeing much more clearly the disparities in the population, how people fared through the pandemic, which is bringing more attention there, who are essential workers in our worlds. And so all of this is generating it's like we cracked open a system, and now as we start to put it back together, we can say, let's do it a little differently, and let's build that world. One of the main points that needs to really be driven home is that when we talk about longevity, we're not talking about old people or any one generation. It's about the life course. And we know that from the first 5 years of life, first year of life has lots of influence on how people are going to fare when they're old. Birth weight predicts heart failure in old age. So there are these linkages that I don't think many people, even in the research community, have been thinking very deeply about until recently. But now I think it is becoming clear that how we treat workers in the middle of life has everything to do with whether they will still be workers later in life. And so I think seeing those connections and how we need to really rethink the system in a life course perspective is very helpful and new. This is socio-emotional selectivity theory, and it's a theory that is grounded in the uniquely human ability to appreciate mortality. So other species monitor time, can measure speed of time, calendar time even in other species, but to our knowledge, humans are the only species where for most of our lives, we know we're not going to live forever. And so from very early in life to later in life, the future comes to be viewed differently. And as you were mentioning, early in life, I think the future is so long and so nebulous, so vast. It's not so much that young people are thinking about how long it is as they're not even thinking about it. So there is a future, and they need to prepare for it. And it could go in so many different directions that almost everything is relevant to their learning portfolio. So younger people will need to and want to be motivated to engage in lots of learning about other people, about different topics, because all of it's helping to prepare them for some nebulous future. And so they may be interested, a young boy may be interested in what it's like to be a father, not because he's a father today, but he knows that in the future that's a likely outcome. And so people are in a kind of collecting mode. We're preparing for some future that we can't really even see that road, right? But so everything's relevant. And then as we grow older, we begin to realize in subtle and not so subtle ways that life isn't going to go on forever. loved ones die, we begin to feel old instead of young. We begin to think about our future work lives as, how many years do I have left? In the scientific community, we talk about how many grant renewals do we have to get, because they come in 5-year cycles, right? So you start to go, well, I only have to probably write 2 more of these and I'll be done, and you start to see how things are coming to a close, endings, and that's what, when that happens, goals change. And we begin to prioritize what's most emotionally meaningful to us, and we don't have to feel the burden of preparing for all sorts of various outcomes. And so there's less exploration, less motivation for new learning, and more motivation for deepening existing relationships, for savoring the things that we value most in life. And that kind of a goal or motivational frame is very good for mental health. It's good to live in the moment. It's good to see what's most important to you and to savor that. And so we see emotional well-being getting better with age, in part because goals change, and in part it's because we know we're mortal. So that's the story in a nutshell. This was called early in the 1980s, people started referring to the paradox of aging. And it was this observation that older people were doing very well emotionally, and rightly, contrasting that with the many problems that we face as we grow older. So, aging is not for sissies. Things go wrong. We lose physical health, social status, we lose loved ones. I mean, there's a lot of difficulty in old age. So when we began to see the evidence come very consistently that older people were doing better in terms of mental health than middle-aged and younger, there was just lots of curiosity about how that could possibly be. And I think in some ways the empirical evidence took a long time to sink in because people just didn't believe it. So in our first studies, when we were finding that older people were reporting less negative emotions, the psychoanalysts would say, "Oh, that's called masked depression, dear." They're really doing terribly, but they just tell you that. And then other people were saying, "Oh, it's because of cognitive decline. They can't remember things well enough to work up a good lather and get really upset." There were other people saying there was atrophy in neural centers in the brain that process emotion, so maybe that accounted for this. And not all of those were examined very thoroughly, and none of them panned out. And we began to realize that we really had to take seriously what older people were telling us and what we were observing in laboratory studies, that older people are managing emotion better. They're experiencing less negative emotion. They're also experiencing more complex emotions, happiness and sadness, what we would call poignancy at the same time. They are also more grateful, more likely to forgive. So we see lots of these emotion-based changes with age, and most of them look really positive and will probably have positive implications, not just for older people, but for the worlds in which they live. I've been changing how I think about work and retirement a lot, and a lot of it is based on learning from Lisa Berkman at Harvard and her research on work. For many of the discussions about work are about trying to extend how long people are in the workforce. So we're just saying push out retirement age. And it turns out that such a substantial number of people are out of the workforce long before they get to retirement age because of disability, means that isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. And the people who are doing best, that is, they have the best paying jobs, the more cognitive jobs, the knowledge-based jobs, they're the ones who are working longer anyway because they like their work. And so we're seeing that it doesn't feel fair to say, let's make janitors work longer because lawyers are living longer. So we have to find a way, again, with a life course perspective, to say, how do we keep people healthy, fit, and able to participate in the workforce? And I think that's more the question in my mind about it than it is, how do we delay their retirement once they get into more advanced ages? Again, it's about early life and midlife. So I think about things like, should certain jobs not be held for longer than, say, 10 years? Maybe fine to be a roofer from the time you're 20 to 30, not a good idea till you're 50 to 60. And so maybe we need to rethink that. And that means we need more training, not just college education, but we need training programs that people, where they can consistently go back, retool, go in a new direction. And if we begin to do that, I think we can build a workforce that supports individuals in order to be able to work and make contributions.